That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Well, hello there. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide. We're going to be taking on a pretty touchy subject today. In fact, I'm not going to lie. I'm a little bit uncomfortable with some of the things that I'm going to be sharing with you just because there's some pretty graphic stuff that has to be addressed here. The theme today is defending the indefensible. Now, I'm not going to be defending the indefensible, but I'm definitely going to be taking to task some of those who are trying to defend the indefensible. And you'll notice it includes some of the usual suspects, at least when it comes to twisting young minds and basically robbing young people of their innocence. So I'm going to start with, this is from a commentary from Jim Jones. And I have to admit, I kind of agree with Jim Jones on the one hand here. This is not the part I agree on, but I'll tell you where I agree here in a moment. He says, Idaho's legislative culture warriors are at it again, weaponizing the government against families with transgender kids and criminalizing their doctors. That is Jim's spin. He says House Bill 71, which passed the House of Representatives on Valentine's Day, now goes to the Senate. If it is enacted into law, Jim tells us it might result in a few suicide attempts by stigmatized transgender kids before being blocked as unconstitutional by a federal court. Okay, now that part, that's pure fantasy, and that is conjecture on his part. As an attorney, I would think he wouldn't go there, but okay, whatever. Jim obviously feels like no one should be standing up against the agenda that is being stealthily introduced and sneaking in the back door of our education systems. Why is it sneaking in the back? Well, it's probably because an approach through the front door, through the legislative process, through a very out in the light of day kind of process would not be supported by, do I dare say this, normal people who still understand the difference between right and wrong. Back to Jim's comments. Transgender legislation seems to be one of the top targets of the culture warriors across the country this year. Now, here's where I'm going to agree with him slightly. There are a lot of bills right now that are dealing with transgender issues. And this bill that would protect transgender minors from being given surgery that takes away or that cuts off healthy body parts, to introducing them to hormone therapy that would stunt their growth and perhaps render them sterile for life. Yeah, I think those are things that need to be approached very carefully. And as I mentioned in an earlier episode, there may be a point where we have to draw a protective boundary around kids simply because this is being pushed. Now, Jim likes to appeal to authority. Well, the majority of the American medical establishment feels this is just fine. Yes, and they also bought into a lot of nonsense regarding COVID and regarding vaccines that turned out to be either false or in some cases harmful or just didn't quite measure up with reality. So let's quit pretending that these are, saints who walk among us in lab coats and understand that, yes, medicine, as we saw very clearly over the last 3 years, can be politicized and sometimes for all the wrong reasons. Back to Jim's commentary. There are a number of bills. But instead of dealing with real issues, he says, like providing funding to repair crumbling school buildings, Jim, please, $400 million infusion, you don't think that's helping? Or to build desperately needed new ones, or providing much needed property tax relief? He says preening lawmakers latch onto something that is not a societal problem and milk it for political points. But he says there is a cost for such shenanigans. Now, he's talking primarily legal costs. And pray tell, where would those lawsuits come from? Oh, yes, the very same activists who are pushing these agendas in the first place. But no, let's blame the parents, and let's blame, again, the people who have a normal worldview that isn't bent and that isn't twisted in some way or perverted in some way. It's their fault for not accepting this. I don't know. That sounds like victim blaming to me, but then again, maybe these parents don't consider themselves victims, or maybe they don't see the potential for their children to become victims of those who are pushing this particular agenda. So the bill to protect minors from permanent transgender treatments, at least until they're of an age where they can make that decision for themselves. Yep, that's certainly on the docket. I've seen policy debates over transgender use of bathrooms. Remember? That one was snuck in under the guise of, well, it's a guideline. It's not really a policy, so we didn't have to say anything, but it was snuck into being and adopted by a number of different schools. And people will ask, well, how many problems are you aware of with that? You don't have to wait until there is a problem like we saw in Loudoun County, Virginia, where a, quote, transgender student raped a young lady. You don't have to wait for something like that to say, this is not a good idea, or this is contrary to what decent people would be willing to support or advocate for their children. Again, adults are one thing, but let's make it very clear when we're dealing with young people who, are too young to get a tattoo, too young to buy cigarettes, too young to buy alcohol, in some cases too young to vote. But we're telling them, oh, but you're perfectly capable of making critical decisions that will impact you for the rest of your life. And thank goodness for people like Chloe Cole, who came to Idaho and told her heartbreaking story of the realization that she had, that she was more or less shepherded through this process with the people in charge of helping her. That needs to be in air quotes. The people helping her, telling her parents, you have to do this or she's going to kill herself. That's pretty powerful incentive to get parents to just basically bend the knee. Okay, well, whatever it takes. I don't want to see harm come to my kid. But it's this line from Jim that really gets me, and that is, it's the idea, instead of dealing with real issues, preening lawmakers latch onto something that's not a societal problem and milk it for political points. But Jim, this is where you get it wrong. It is a real problem. And I'm going to illustrate exactly how big of a real problem it is, in the sense that this is not the product of somebody's imagination. And those you're calling cultural warriors are not people who are just itching for a chance to go impose some kind of legislation so they can show those people who do not wish to adhere to normality and, in fact, pride themselves. And you're going to see just how deeply they pride themselves on defying normative behavior. This isn't a product of parents wanting to be in there trying to stand up for something in order to protect their children. It's a matter of them being backed into a corner and forced into having to come forward and defend things that are worth defending. In other words, it was your cultural Marxist activists who brought this to the forefront. And they didn't even have the intellectual honesty or the decency to try to do it through, straightforward, public deliberative bodies, lawmaking bodies, public policy. No, it has to be snuck in the back door. Let's give you an example. This is a report that was just published recently by the Idaho Freedom Foundation. I strongly recommend go to their website, check this out for yourself, and I want to make sure that I'm giving proper credit where credit is due. Anna K. Miller, Sam Dorman, and Scott Yener are the authors of this article. It's very well researched. It is backed up with facts and figures, and yet maybe you won't be surprised when you see people trying to defend the indefensible, namely the West Ada School Library, this is the high school library, has been promoting pornographic pro-gender transition books. Now, here's where we're going to get into some fairly graphic things. From the article, Idaho's public school libraries are stacked with books that encourage minors to embrace left-wing and permissive ideas about sex. Public records requests have revealed this. A good place to start is West Ada School District, which has been circulating more than 50 books with sexually explicit or LGBTQ plus content. So today, this article just focuses on two of those titles. Let's talk about it. The Teen's Guide to Sex. The Teen's Guide to Sex, really? Relationships and Being a Human. And Trans Plus, Love, Sex, Romance, and Being You, which have been circulating in the district. Now, the article goes on to tell us, written by the married couple behind the webcomic Oh Joy, Sex Toy. Let's Talk About It includes chapters with instructions on how to masturbate, how to consume pornography. It encourages students to become porn stars or sex workers through a cartoon illustration of someone performing oral sex on another with a studio light close by. The authors admonish readers who might watch pornography uncritically or fail to treat the performers with respect. Now, look, I know that for some people that's their thing, and for adults, if that's something they want to consume, that is a choice that they can make. Why would we pretend that teaching kids, hey, being a sex worker is great, and you start your OnlyFans account? Why, you could probably put yourself through school like that. I don't know. It seems to me that it's pretty sketch, as well as opening them up to a world of sexual predators, which I think most parents, would say, I don't really want my kid doing that. The book urges readers to discuss their kinks and sexual interests with strangers on the internet. When was that ever a good idea? A great place to research fantasies and kinks safely is on the internet, the authors say. There are tons of people and communities out there who share your interests and have all kinds of advice. Oh, I can only bet. Yeah. And if you're lucky, maybe one of them will be the police officer pretending to be a 13-year-old girl. I don't know, man. It's It's risky beyond words. It encourages kids to share intimate photos on the internet. Before you start sending your naughty masterpieces around the world, take some time to get friendly with photo editing software or apps. Digital photos are permanent and impossible to retract once they're out there. So keep your recognizable features out of them before you share them. Does that sound like sound advice you'd want to give a teen? Yeah, before you start sending, sexual pictures of yourself, make sure you're doing something to protect your identity. Wow. The book's narrative on masturbation is just one of many that criticize sexual norms. One female character suggests to another that masturbation must precede sexual intercourse. Whoa, wait, you've never masturbated? The character asks. Geez, forget about fooling around with someone else. We got to have a chat about getting in touch with your sexual self. You can't expect sex with another person to feel good if you don't even know what it feels like for yourself. Again, if this was for adults, it would be one thing. But this is what's being made available to kids. Trans Plus, Love, Sex, Romance, and Being You was written by left-wing ideologues Catherine Gonzalez and Dr. Karen Rain. Now, this is a book that offers tips on chest binding and packing or the wearing of padding or some kind of phallic object to give the appearance of having a bulge in the genital area. It also outlines methods for tucking the penis back and between the legs to produce a flat appearance in the genital region. The authors promote polyamory while their characters eat ice cream. Romantic relationships come in different flavors, they say. There's no wrong choice. You can explore as many or as few as you fancy. In fact, virginity, meanwhile, is described as a silly label some people came up with to describe a person who hasn't done a specific sexual act, traditionally a cisgender man or woman who hasn't yet had penis and vagina intercourse. Now, both Let's Talk About It and Trans Plus, another book available in Centennial High School, feature cartoon illustrations of nude and purportedly transgender individuals. This book, like others found in Idaho schools, is framed entirely inside the radical gender ideology informing the trans view of the world. Now, again, for adults to consider, that's one thing. But to put this in front of impressionable minds, and yes, I'm saying even high school minds are young, impressionable minds, that's a pretty big step to be making. And it sounds to me like, for all the world, this is about seducing people and enticing them to explore something that they may not yet be ready to accept the responsibility for, which is why you have this bill that would criminalize certain types of so-called gender-affirming care that results in permanent damage to the patient should they ever change their mind. Gender identities depicted as innate and immutable. Some kids are just born that way and can know this as toddlers. They may be unhappy because our transphobic society, we're not afraid, okay? Don't mistake lack of acceptance of a particular kink as fear. Sometimes it's disgust. Sometimes it's just, no, that's an aversion to something that seems very off. But they say that our society pigeonhole them into categories of normal gender binaries or normal sex. Schools and society must affirm the new identity. Ooh, is this a rare moment of honesty here in which they're actually admitting that this is about inculcating proper attitudes, which again, this is to a captive audience of kids. Is this really a wise thing to be doing? A new world beyond the binary is possible. In fact, quite counter to history, Trans Plus begins with an apparent message for individuals experiencing gender confusion, seeking to reassure them that their gender-confused ancestors were treated as gods. Listen to this quote. Transgender and gender non-binary people have often held a revered place in their societies. So go forward in this book, in your life, in your world, knowing that you are perfect, whole, and complete. It reads, operate from a place where you know your own power, your own marvelousness. Know that your ancestors were no less than gods. Wow, full of yourself much? Think about the message that is sending to a confused young kid. And by the way, if they act on this, let's just say, for instance, I'm just going to use Chloe Cole's example. The thing that snapped her out of the realization, or snapped her into the realization that she had made a terrible and in a nearly irreversible mistake, was the fact that she would never be able to breastfeed her child if she chose to have one, because she had had her breasts surgically removed. So transgender is about sterilizing an entire generation of kids. How are you going to say, oh yes, your gender confused ancestors were treated as gods? How did they reproduce? If they were that gender confused, were they even able to reproduce? I'm certain they didn't have the in vitro fertilization and some of the modern marvels that we have today. That just it's beyond arrogant. It's twisted. This is bent thinking. This is where good is evil, evil is good, and evil fully expects to win. Dangerous, dangerous stuff to be peddling to kids. Now, these books and others have raised questions about Idaho law, which provides a loophole for obscenity within institutions that exist for an educational purposes, such as public schools. Recently proposed state-level legislation, the Children's School and Library Protection Act, would prohibit school employees from making harmful material available to minors. Now, it would allow minors who obtained harmful materials in violation of the law or their parents or legal guardians to bring a civil lawsuit if school or library personnel distributed the materials or if the school or the library failed to take reasonable steps to restrict access to material harmful to minors. Look, I understand some people will say, well, that's a subjective call. What some parents may think is harmful to minors may not be, thought of as harmful by others. And that's true. But that's a question that should be settled within their home rather than within the school, which is funded by taxpayer dollars. So, this is one of the places where if society is going to be paying for the operation of that school and that library, it is better to err on the side of normalcy and community standards and setting appropriate standards for what is decent and what isn't, rather than trying to impose this brave new world of anything goes sexually. Now, the bill text would seemingly preclude content like Trans Plus and Let's Talk About It from reaching school library shelves. In defining content that's harmful to minors, it includes depictions of masturbation, sexual excitement, sexual conduct more generally, and nudity, among other things. So, again, kids are going to encounter a lot of different things out there, but the question is, should it be readily available to them through official, meaning government-funded, channels? I think it's very reasonable for parents to say not just no, but hell no. That's not appropriate. Deputy Superintendent of West Ada School District Nick Smith contradicted records provided by his chief of staff, denying that these books were in circulation in West Ada school libraries. But the public record plainly lists the books among those in circulation at Centennial High School. Now, the school district later said, well, the books have been lost, but a February 21st email obtained via a public records request shows that Chief of Staff Nikki Sheppers told Smith both books were marked as lost in the district's computer system. Nonetheless, Sheppers told Smith they're still technically in circulation. I'm sorry, that seems a little bit hinky. Maybe there's just something totally innocent and there was just, somebody must have made some kind of human error. Or could it be that there's some sneakiness because they know that there are parents and people who are just not supportive of this and not willing to accept it? Now, just for fun, thank you, Dustin Hurst, for sharing. These are the West Ada School District test scores. I'm just going to cut through this briefly here, but look at that statewide percentage. Proficient in reading, 37%. Proficient in reading in the fourth grade, that is 37%. About the same in eighth grade. Proficient in math, 43%. That's fourth grade. Eighth grade, proficient in math, 37%. Wow. What are the kids becoming proficient in? Penis tucking? Use of butt plugs? I'm sorry. I know that's seems vulgar and shocking, and yet if it seems vulgar and shocking, would you please take at least enough time to ask yourself, then why on earth would it be presented to kids as, hey, you want to explore this? Look, here's a fun book complete with illustrations that'll show you, what it's all about. Okay, now here's where I'm just going to quickly go through some of the illustrations. And, these are, there are some parts that are blacked out here, but you can see for yourself. This is pretty graphic stuff. And this is all explaining it in a very positive sense. Oh, look, this is really great. And so, well, what if I look at too much pornography? Oh, well, if you think you're seeing too much, maybe you should think about cutting back a little bit. If you would be shocked showing this to another adult, or if you would feel like, that would make me really uncomfortable, why on earth would you want to put this in front of young people? Yes, there are people out there who deal with these issues, but why on earth would you want to put it in front of kids? There's appropriateness. There's a time and a place. Yeah, they may encounter it, if they're left alone to their own devices, they may stray into it on the internet. Why would you put it in front of them via official channels, giving this appearance of legitimacy? Unless, of course, you're trying to promote this without being too obvious. Look at this, Society of Secret Library Friends. Somebody pointed out on Twitter, boy, if there was ever a group that was missing a chance for a great name for pedophiles to gather under, we're the Society of Secret Library Friends. We can direct you to all the naughtiest material in the library. They sent this tweet, and I'm pointing this one out because Brian Holmes from KTVB retweeted this. The Idaho Freedom Foundation has published a new blog post spreading a lot of fear about 2 books that may be available from West Ada high school libraries. Let's talk about it, and Trans Plus, Sex, Love, Romance, and Being You. Why? Well, because these books affirm trans people. No, it's because these books promote deviant behavior. It's not about affirming trans people. You got to make a distinction between the person and the behavior. And the behavior that is being promoted here, as you can see through the illustrations, it's a bit much for kids. Now, I have to give credit to Anna Miller responding to Brian on this and asking, hey, should these books be handed to kids in school, Brian? Or do you plan to continue pretending that the people want to ban Ferdinand? Apparently, the list of books that potentially could be banned included the book about Ferdinand the Bull. The Bull, rather. I don't know why it's on it, but it was on the list that the West Ada School District provided. Now, Brian Holmes' response, and this is classic Brian Holmes, well, perhaps this explains it. I mean, if you want to stand on the same side as Hitler. Oh, the sophistry. Isn't he clever? Why, the book Ferdinand the Bull was banned in Spain and Germany? Oh, my goodness. Well, if it was banned, if Hitler banned it, then who are we to question any of these books? Okay, not so fast. Anna comes back with a very nice comeback here. Well, I saw Brian walk on 2 legs. Hitler walked on 2 legs. Brian is just like Hitler. West Ada sent Anna a public record of about 60 books in schools linked in the story, more than 50 of which are pornographic or promote radical gender theory. She tells him, stick to the weather, Brian, and that's actually very solid advice. Look, there are things that are defensible. There are things that which reasonable people can disagree on. But in this case, why is it that so much of officialdom, and I'm talking the legacy media, I'm talking about the teachers' unions, I'm talking about certain politicians, why is it that there is such a push right now to introduce this kind of material to young people, and especially in a school setting? You don't have to be, filled with hate and loathing of people who are different than you to assert that, there are standards for a good reason. There are boundaries that are there for a good reason, part of which is to protect young minds. And it's not because, they're so fragile, it's just going to break them. It's more a matter of there comes a point in life where we are capable of bearing the weight of responsibility for our decisions properly. And until that time, parents primarily are the ones who have to make that decision. But when you put this into a public school setting where a one-size-fits-all approach seems to be the way to handle anything, well, if it's good for one kid, it ought to be good for every kid. In fact, it shouldn't just be good, it should be mandatory. No. When there's a question like this, perhaps it's time to step back, maybe solicit some input from parents. By the way, the Caldwell School District, they got input, whether they wanted it or not. There was plenty of input asking them, or telling them, hey, we don't want our kids being subjected to this garbage. Now, I have to note this. The idea that this is not even a societal problem, as Jim Jones, former Attorney General, says, is dead wrong. And the Center for Disease Control points this out with the recent study they released earlier this month, talking about the incredible rate of unhappiness and depression in young people today. Now, I'm not putting this all at the feet of, this transgender or gender identity ideology, but certainly there is a relationship between there's some cause and effect that's going on here. It's not to say that gender ideology is the sole cause. But you also see there is such a thing as social contagion. And as it becomes a very lucrative business for certain people in medicine, to where they have these gender-affirming care clinics and so forth, pediatric gender-affirming care, it's a big money maker. It's a lifetime, however short or long that lifetime may be, kind of project. They're going to constantly be having more surgeries, more treatment, more hormone adjustment and whatnot. Does not seem like a good idea to be defending this as a wise and bold and compassionate way to handle what's some very real unhappiness and confusion on the part of young people. I think the part that was most telling was the fact that there was a 60% increase in high school girls contemplating suicide. Now, again, I'm not putting that at the feet of the LGBTQ plus activists, but I also would have to point out that if you want to see some real unhappiness, you want to see people really coming unhinged, many of those activists, in fact, some of the most outspoken activists, are among the most unhinged people that you will ever encounter in your life. That doesn't mean that all people who might identify as LGBTQ plus, are activists. No, most of them aren't. In fact, I'd say it's a very safe bet. There are people in your life who are probably gay, who don't make a big deal out of it. They don't live their life as a political statement because it's less important to them to be identified by one single facet of who they are and more important of them to actually be decent people. And we all know people who are like this, and they're not the ones out there militantly being activists and trying to persuade us that, hey, it's really a good idea for guys in lingerie to be spending more time with our kids. So for those who are defending the indefensible, look, you can call names if you want. It doesn't matter. You can try the whole guilt by association thing. Frankly, that Brian Holmes would play the Hitler card so soon, wow. He must have run out of sophistry in a big hurry to have to lay down the Hitler card that quickly. But the fact remains, there are standards. There is such a thing as normalcy. And there are good people who may be very concerned for those who are having identity crisis issues and confusion and would be very happy to extend compassion to them. But that compassion doesn't mean we have to full-throatedly defend the indefensible and embrace whatever delusion they may happen to be laboring under at the moment. And calling it delusion is not, judging their character. It's just recognizing this is a challenge that they're dealing with. And maybe the best way to help them isn't just to indulge it and basically put that kid in the driver's seat and say, there, you take us wherever you want to go, and parents and doctors will follow, doctors with dollar signs in their eyes, parents, with the hope that my kid won't harm himself or herself, or they-self, as the case may be. I know it seems like a balance, a delicate balance to strike. Can you be compassionate and still oppose this kind of radical ideology being introduced to your kids? I believe it is possible. But you have to be pretty firm yourself in knowing right from wrong and knowing where you stand. And that doesn't mean you have to be loud or angry or militant yourself in order to make such a stand. You just have to really be clear. Where does your moral compass point? And at what point would you stand up and say, this is not right, and I'm not going to allow my child to be part of it? Okay, that puts a little bit of responsibility back on us, doesn't it? So let's not outsource all of it to the legislature or teachers or anybody else. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not